I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for today's shiur. So first we thank Ruth and David Zimmerman to commemorate the yahrzeit of Ruth's parents, Sarah Miriam Bat Binyamin HaKohen and Yosef Ben Avram Abba, Zichronom Livracha. So we do thank you. May the neshamas have an aliyah. And we also like to thank Molly and Arthur Kaplan. He's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Molly's father, Velvel Kleiner, Velvel Ben Shalom. Zichronom Livracha and neshamas have an aliyah. We do thank you very much for sponsorship. Happy Chanukah to all. Welcome to the holiday where the oil lasts for long in many different areas of the body indeed, so you should enjoy this Yom Tiv. I'm going to ask you a question. We'll start with a halachic question. So you light the Hanukkah candles, right? And technically speaking, you could fulfill this mitzvah by lighting within your house. It's not a must to do it by a door or a window. But nevertheless, we try to go ahead and place our menorah where it's going to be noticeable to the world out there. We call it Pirsum Hanes. Or if you want to work with your Aramaic 101, Pirsume Nisa. Right? Same idea. You want to publicize it. You want the world to know. Now, it is not just to inform people who have no knowledge, but rather even people who know, when they see it, it's a reminder and an inspiration, right? There's something very special about going down a street and seeing menorahs. There's something special if you have the privilege of being in Yerushalayim or in Israel and walking from door to door and seeing it. It inspires even if you know. Pirsume Nisa, lefarsem, to publicize the miracle. Now comes the question, who are you trying to reach out to, right? Who do you want to illuminate by lighting the candles by the window? Is it for the Jews who might be seeing it? Statistically speaking, if you have the option of lighting on Bathurst, if you do have a house, an apartment facing Bathurst, and you have 100 cars driving by, so there will be a chance that 4 of them, 5 of them on Bathurst, perhaps more than that, Jews who will spot it, see it, remember it's Hanukkah, and you have achieved your Pirsum Hanes. Are you trying to reach out for the Jews who see it, or perhaps you think broader and you want to go ahead and have members of the human race, all humans see it? Which one? What do you have in mind, the Pirsum Hanes? La Yehudim or to humanity?
Is there a third choice?
It's Judaism, there has to be.
No, like your own family.
Yeah, both.
Okay, so there's no question, today the main focus is our own family, right? And therefore, technically speaking, you could fulfill the obligation by placing it on a table at home. And that's how it was done in many communities. Today we have the option, the opportunity of putting it by a window, by a door, and we want to go ahead and expand a little bit. But when we are expanding, do we have in mind for ourselves or do we have in mind for all humans? A fair question, I think. And this relates to a very a broad issue that I've struggled with, dealt with for many, many years. That is the relationship between Israel ve'ha'amim. In other words, the relationship between the Jew and the world. How much do I want to concern myself about the welfare of humanity, right? How much value is there if I do for the world? And when I say do for the world, there's physical doing, physical concern for the welfare of the world, and there's also a spiritual one. In other words, if I could go ahead and reach out and teach some meaning of existence to humanity, does it serve a purpose? Or let's go back to the physical, to go ahead and assist, right?
So, what does Or Lagoim mean?
Okay, so the question is, what does it mean to be an Or Lagoim? I mean, obviously, when you go through our text, there's no question that there is this idea that we're out there to reach out, to become the light upon the nations, to go ahead and Be like Avraham Avinu, who taught and educated and inspired. So now, if things would be as they should, and we would be in the land of Israel, and we would be where we're supposed to be, there's no question that that's part of who we are about. To reach out, to teach, to inspire humanity, to be concerned about humanity, teach them ethics and values. All true. Unfortunately, before you become a teacher, you have to have some kind of documentation, you have to have some kind of accreditation, you have to go ahead and be worthy of becoming a teacher. To be an ethical teacher, you have to be a person who has ethics, who has values, right? Who has decency. And as a nation, we're not too bad, but we're not there yet, just for the record. We're not there yet. And we're going through this process that we call a galut. So at this point, we're not really able to fulfill this ideal mission, which we do hope for, which we do pray for. Right? No question. So when we are in this state right now, where we are holding, I think our main focus should be about taking care of ourselves. And that's ethical. In other words, when my brother needs something, he comes before the stranger. If another Jewish person needs something, there is no question that they come first. The question is, how much concern do I have for the welfare of humanity? Right? How much effort should I put into it? And when you ask different Jewish people, observant Jews, non-observant Jews, you're going to get different answers, right? You've heard a lot about tikkun olam, right? A term that has been coined, and people run with it, right? They run with it. So they're going to go ahead and Habitat for Humanity. They're going to go ahead and make their way to Africa and help. So how much value is there? And I'm asking it as a Jew who is indeed trying to figure out, what does Judaism really want me to focus on? What outlook is Judaism trying to teach me? Now, the reason I struggle with it is because I went through very traditional institutions, what you would call right-wing institutions, right? Some of you would even call it Haredi institutions, right? I went through them. At the same time, I would think, and I would ask these questions. Now, we do know, and this is again my personal belief, that institutions that encourage their students and inspire them to be concerned about their people, right, and to do for their people, physically and spiritually. Physically means to take care, to be involved in a tzedakah organization, right? Family services. There are many, many physical needs, financial, emotional, psychological. Doing for our people is important, and there's no question the institution I went through, the institutions that educated me, the yeshivas I went through, focus on that. You are here to do for the people of Klal Yisrael. You are here to go ahead and take care of their physical, and if you have the tools to inspire them spiritually, do that as well. No question, very, very important. The question is more, when the institution focuses on the inside, what's going to be their attitude towards the outside? And there's always that danger that when there is too much focus on the inside, the outside becomes insignificant or less. What do I mean by and less? As we know very well that sometimes there could be an attitude that look at the other as less of a human being. And that's obviously very, very dangerous. And it could become the result of such a philosophy of teaching where the focus is on the inside. And I always love sharing a story which really proves to me, which gives me the complete picture of what my institution or what my chinuch was about. I was in Chicago on Sunday. I went to be Menachem Avol. My Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Avram Chaim Levin, passed away last week, so I went. I have a very close relationship with members of that family, so I went in to do Nichum Avelim. Now, he was a great man. He was a great man with complete commitment to the people of Israel, complete commitment to personal growth, and one that inspired. He inspired many, 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 many disciples, many of them, and they don't all look alike. Meaning among his Talmidim, among those who follow and were inspired by him, it's a diverse crowd because when he would teach about menschlichkeit, about being a decent person, and teach about being committed to the people of Israel, it could be done in many, many different ways. So indeed a very special and inspiring individual. So I would share with you a story that I've shared here in the past, that we were in yeshiva in the late 80s, and there was a terrible earthquake in Armenia. And tens of thousands of people died from the earthquake. So there are two ninth grade students who are having a conversation about the earthquake, and one of them turns to the other and says, "Did you hear? There was an earthquake, and 10,000 people died." So the other ninth grade student, meaning a freshman, new into the system, right? Raw material, ninth grader responds, "Well, who cares? They were all goyim." That was the response of the ninth grader. Now the young man, the poor young man, did not know that right behind him was the Rosh Yeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Levin. And Rabbi Levin, he had a firmness when needed to get a message across. And he raised his voice at the young man and he said, "How can you say such a thing?" And he started yelling, "Tselem Elokim," meaning every human being is created in the image of God. How on earth can you say such a thing? Tselem Elokim, he cried out. Now, when such a thing occurs in a yeshiva, within 2 minutes, this is before WhatsApp and Twitter, everyone knew about it. Everyone knew about it. The lesson was a very powerful one. That in this institution, yes, we focus on doing for our people, because that is what is ethically correct. But at the same time, there should be concern for the welfare of humanity. We pray for them. We are concerned about them. The ninth grader did not know that I have no doubt that after that he knew the message very, very well until today. But that is what the institution has to do. In other words, they focus on the inside, but at the same time, we have to communicate the idea of the significance of humanity. I always keep an eye out when I study rabbinic thinkers that are, again, from a very traditional school. When I find within them a sensitivity towards humanity, I want to read everything about it. Meaning I have an interest of finding out of traditional thinkers who were, members, saw themselves as members of the human race, concerned for the human race. I mentioned here quite often Rabbi Yechetzkel Sarna from the Chevron Yeshiva. And in his writings, how much he talks about God loves every human being. Right now, there's additional love that was given to the people of Israel because we have a responsibility to humanity. But the love and the importance and the significance in a human life is something that is so much part of Judaism. And this is something that in the Telz Yeshiva was mentioned quite often. This is something that we have to be mindful of. We are concerned about humanity, period. Yes, we have an inner focus. You know that the Talmud shares with us that the Sanhedrin sat as a Chatzi Goren. Chatzi Goren. Now, what is a Goren? A Goren is a threshing floor. Threshing floors were circular. Why were threshing floors circular? Circular because they had the mechanism of the oxen that would make their round like hakofis around the circle, and that's how they would go ahead and separate the grain and do the threshing. So now the rabbis tell us when the Sanhedrin would sit, when the elders would sit, they would have to sit in a semicircle. Why was it so important to sit in the semicircle? Because if you have a dais, if you have many rabbis, and they sit at a table, and it's a straight table, they're not looking at one another. Each one's looking at the crowd, or hoping that the crowd is looking at them and seeing how great they are because they're sitting up there. But they're sitting there as great people looking out to the world. That's no good. Because if you want to have rabbis coming up with guidance for the people of Israel, they have to learn to see one another. You have to see a person that thinks a little bit differently than you. The semicircle, when you are sitting in the semicircle, you could see one another. There's a rabbi that has a little bit more of a liberal view on an issue. You look in his eyes and you connect with him. You might see things differently, but there's respect, there's dignity, there's a connection. The importance of the semicircle was the Sanhedrin. This is what we are told. And some point out that Sanhedrin, when we are sitting in Israel, we are open to humanity, right? When we are comfortable, when we are settled, when we are where we should be, that's indeed when we are that open circle, the synagogue, like Galut. You know what Galut caused us to do? We closed up. We're an inner circle now because we need to protect ourselves. We need to preserve Judaism. We have to be sure that it's around 100 years from now. So our main focus is going to be educating our own. Right? We don't have programs in the synagogue where we are reaching out. We don't put out big signs, come learn about Judaism. Right? We don't focus on that. We are concerned, but we have a focus. We have to preserve. We have to educate. We take care of ourselves. But in no way should that, God forbid, turn into an attitude that they are any less of human beings or any less important. Okay? So this is this balance that we have. Yes, we take care of ourselves, but at the same time we are concerned about humanity. So let's talk about physical needs, right? Physical needs of humanity. Giving tzedakah. By the way, Jewish law requires that when you give tzedakah and a non-Jew comes, you have to give him. This is what Jewish law tells us. It's known as darkei shalom, right? You have to be sensitive. It is quite problematic when you have charities that only give to people within a community. That is against Jewish law. Jewish law requires to be open, to give to the general community. No question about that. Now, if you are seeking guidance in Torah to figure out how to balance it and how to do it properly, we have in this week's Parsha the man who achieved it, which is Yosef. Yosef, now by the way, this week's Parsha, we walk into the mature Yosef. Last week he's 17. Last week he is still trying to figure out who he is, struggling with his brothers, and now suddenly he is reaching his full potential. So this is what we are going to be doing this week's Parsha, to learn the proper balance and really see what Yosef is about. Now, you know the story, but a brief run through it. Paro has two dreams. First dream he has with cows. Second dream with sheaves of grain. No one of the Egyptians have a clue how to go ahead and decipher it. Yosef is successful, comes out of the jail, becomes the second in command, and takes complete control of the country. Complete control of the country. And he is running it, he's, lahavdil, when you talk about presidents of the United States, everyone now is talking about George Bush. Olav Shalom said, so that we talk about presidents of the United States, there were those that were not too much involved in the details. In other words, they understood, you could think of a current one, that they see themselves as president, and then others deal with the details. And then you have people like Jimmy Carter, right? Not exactly a success story, but at the same time, a detail-oriented individual, right? He would tell people to lower their thermostat to keep things cool. The night before he left the White House, he was up the whole night in the Oval Office. He was up ganze Nacht. Why? Because he was dealing with trying to release the hostages from Iran. And very typical that he was the one that worked hours upon hours and did not succeed. And Ronald Reagan just walked into office, and what happened? They were released, right? There's something there. But the idea is that when it comes to leaders, there are different ways of doing it. Yosef is involved in every single detail, and he does some very interesting things. He consolidates power, and he centralizes it. Every decision made, grain being sold, it had to go through him. Complete control over the country. It's interesting that the 10 brothers show up. Why do the 10 brothers show up?
They're starving.
They're starving. They need food. Why did they have to send all 10? This is like the big mystery. Why send all 10? Send one of them, right? So, the commentators note, Yosef was concerned that a black market is going to develop if you're going to go ahead and sell grain and people are going to have more than what they need. They're going to start selling it on the black market, and this will corrupt the system. This will cause prices to go up. The man who wanted to control it all was sure that I will sell you if the head of household shows up. This is what he did. And therefore all 10 of them had to come, because otherwise they would not get enough grain to feed their family. So Yosef has a very fascinating approach, and the big question is, why is Yosef doing it? Why is Yosef doing all this? One approach would be, he senses that in the future, family members, his families are going to be making their way down to Egypt. Remember, these are people that receive traditions from their parents and grandparents. There was this concept of an exile. being mindful of the fact that there's going to be an exile, and he sensed it's going to be in Egypt, he wanted to make the exile the best it could be, and therefore he works things out in Egypt for the sake of his family. One approach. But then there's approach number two, and they most probably will have to bring the two of them together. This is a man that saw a problem in Egypt as a society, and he wanted to fix the problems that existed there in Egypt, and that is what he was trying to achieve. Okay, so these are all introductions. Now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Parsha. Now, one more thing, you can turn to page 222. The two dreams that we read about last week. The first dream related to, what was the image in one word? The first dream of last week that Yosef had, grain, right? Bundles of grain. The second dream that he has last week when he's a young man and he's 17, what does he have? The celestial bodies, right? Now, that symbolizes the idea that for us Jews, you want to be a leader. That's basically what Yosef was communicating. I am the leader. When you are a leader, the first concern you should have is for the physical welfare of the people you lead. That's number one. It's fundamental. It's the greatest mitzvah. Take care of people's physical basic needs. You sustain them. I am the leader, declared Yosef. Listen to my dreams. Dream number one related to food. Dream number two, because for us Jews, the goal is not just to have food, right? The goal is that we have food and we think about what life is about, right? After you take care of the basic need, you could go ahead and think about the purpose of existence, of growth, connecting to God, praying to Him, keeping our traditions, being sure our traditions are transmitted and transferred to the next generation. Number two, we move on to things that are celestial, the sun, the moon, which symbolizes something far greater, but it has to start with grain. Dream number one, the first step of Jewish leadership is for the basic concern of people. Grain, and then you can move on to celestial bodies. Now look on the other hand in this week's Parsha, dream number one is parot. He starts with cows. And then dream number two, then they go ahead and he moves on to the grain. So it's interesting that here the grain becomes the second dream. What's it about, right? Now, rabbis sometimes have issues in their position, right? They interact with people. And at times there are some difficulties. Now, Baruch Hashem, I've had it overall quite well. I'm very grateful to the Almighty. But other rabbis have had complexities, and sometimes within rabbinic literature, you'll find a rabbi kvetching a little bit. And one of them was a rabbi by the name of Rava in Talmudic times. And he lived in a city called Machoza. And he complained that the people of Machoza, right, are lazy. They just know how to eat and enjoy themselves, and they don't like working. And in many Talmudic sections, in many sections of the Talmud, he talks about the people of Machoza. Like, for example, the Talmud tells us that on Erev Shabbos, as you get closer to Shabbos, it's not appropriate to be involved in work that is not Shabbos related. In other words, if you're in the industry of working in a field, if you're in agriculture, or if you are creating garments, Erev Shabbos, as you get close to Shabbos, it's not a time to be involved in work, it's a time to prepare for Shabbos. So he says, Rava gets up and says, you know what, the people of Machoza, they're very careful with that. I never see them working Erev Shabbos in the afternoon. I never see them working ever, really, to be honest, he says. But nevertheless, it's a nice thing. Now, so in one section of the Talmud, the Rava tells us that you should know that there's a verse stated by the prophet Amos. And Amos complains about what he calls Parot HaBashan, the cows of the Bashan, the fat cows of the region of the Bashan in Israel. And commentators note that he was commentators tell us that this prophet Amos was really addressing the problem of the wives of the rulers. The wives of the rulers were not concerned about the welfare of society. They were concerned about their own welfare, and they had very, very high standards of living. So therefore, the verse Amos tells us, Shimu adavar hazeh, tune in, you parot bashan, you fat cows. right? And commentators say, Nishei Hasarim. And due to the fact that they were demanding from their husbands that the wealth, they blamed the women, that's what was being done by Amos, due to the fact that they were pressuring their husbands to bring home the money that they could purchase jewelry, right? Or, a few weeks ago I took Abigail, I actually bought her, I was sent, I should say, to buy her shoes. I was sent to buy her shoes. And believe it or not, I succeeded, which is quite incredible, because she's actually wearing it. And then, when I mentioned to my mother, that I got Abigail shoes, and for some reason she knows that she has shoes, I don't know how, she says, like my mom says, Imelda Marcos. That's what she says. Why would my mother do that to her granddaughter and compare her? Because Imelda Marcos, as you know, had, they say, 3,000 pairs of shoes. She loved shoes. So therefore, the comparison is. Now, Imelda Marcos symbolizes this idea that you have a ruler, and bottom line is they're both corrupt, because such wealth exists there. Give back to society. But the problem is, says Amos, they are oshkot dalim. They go ahead and they steal from the poor. Rotzitzot avyonim, they destroy and they stamp and they trample on the poor. Be'omrom ladonehem, when the wives say to their husbands, Havia venishte, let's just party, let's just have a good time, right? You talk about society. I mentioned in the past Iran, right? The Shah of Iran, the wealth. I was reading, just fascinating. According to some estimates, that when he left Iran in 1979, it was over $1 billion, and some say billions, that he took. And again, this is money that he put just for a rainy day, in case he would have to leave, in case the Americans, as they always do, are going to go ahead and back off their support. But the incredible waste that is done when there are people in society that basically don't have fresh water, this is what Amos is crying out. There's something very problematic here when you have these parot habashan. So it comes out, and this is what commentators say, when you read in dream number 1 that he has an image, that Pharaoh has a dream, and in his dream God is communicating something to him, that there's a problem in your society. The problem is parot habashan, in verse 2, parot yafot mareh, briot basar. They're okay, they're very, very comfortable, right? North Korea, I'm not suggesting that we have a shul tour there, but they say that in Pyongyang, you walk there and everything seems magnificent and everyone seems happy. And they're always clapping whenever you watch on TV, right? You will see them clapping when the supreme ruler walks in. But if you would go to areas where they would never take you, you would see starvation. Parot habashan. And this is a problem that exists in Paro's Mitzrayim. Now, what's standing behind them? What's happening in a society? What do you have behind these cows? In verse 3, Sheva parot acharot. And what are they? Which symbolizes society. Ra'ot mareh v'tagot dakot basar. They have absolutely nothing to eat, complete starvation. And they are always standing behind. There's always that potential of the government being overthrown. When you run a society, when natural resources are not channeled the way they should be, in a Jewish way, for the sake of those who need it, they're always going to be standing there because the revolution is not far off, right? A coup d'etat will happen eventually in a society where there is such corruption, when you have such wealth, when 90% are getting nothing and the 10% are getting everything. Bottom line, that's how it works. Now, what's interesting is that many times when you do have a revolution, right, you think that it turns everything upside down and suddenly the 90% get everything. You know what happens? That when those skinny cows do take over, right, guess what? Everything stays the same. They look the same. And therefore, in Pharaoh's dream, when he repeats it, he mentions the fact that after the thin, skinny cows swallow the fat ones, nothing changes. You think in Iran everything is perfect now because you think that all the money is really going where it should be? Or the billions now are in banks, perhaps not in the United States, but probably in Russia and in China. The mullahs have their millions, if not billions. That's how the world works, and that's a corruption that cannot be fixed unless you go ahead and put a person who understands that there's more to life than pleasure. Because if you come, a lot of people come to power with this agenda, with this excitement to fix the world, but you get comfortable. You get comfortable, and eventually you become that new selfish ruler. If there's a fear of God, if there's a Yosef in the picture, he's going to change that society. And that's what Yosef is going to communicate. That you need to know that if you want to go ahead and deal with this issue, grain is number 2. When, for us Jews, right, when he wants to communicate with his brothers, that we have, right, I have a very unique role. He wants to communicate with his brothers the very, very unique role. I will take care of your physical needs and your spiritual needs. To Mitzrayim, the message is you should know that you first have to go ahead and uproot the corruption. You uproot the corruption, then you could go ahead and deal with the sustain the grain. So that's basically the main theme. Now, if you turn to page 226, and in verse 33, he actually does not just interpret the dream, but he goes ahead and gives some advice. Verse 33. Ve'ata. Now he tells Pharaoh the following. Now, Yereh Paro should seek out ish navon vechacham, and he should go ahead and set him over the land of Egypt. Now, usually in our tradition, when we talk about wisdom, there's 2 stages of wisdom. There's chokhmah, right? You sit and you study Torah. You study any field, you develop chokhmah. But then you have the ability to build on it, right? I'm given information. You go through a program, right? In a master's. You go through a master's, you hopefully attain some wisdom. In your PhD, there's something new that you have to create based on the information that you have. In Jewish tradition, we would call that tvuna. It comes from the word binyan. You are building on the information that you have. So you have to be a chacham, and then you turn into a navon. That's the general way of doing it. Here it's very, very interesting that number 1, Yosef, who was basically asked, give me insight regarding the dream, and what is he telling Pharaoh? Here he's telling Pharaoh what you have to do. He's giving advice as well, very Jewish, right? You're asked to just share information, but you are determined to give some advice as well. Ve'ata, you should go ahead and see Pharaoh. And ish doesn't say chacham v'navon. What does it say? Navon v'chacham. Why is it switched around? So it seems to be that when you are only developing in things that are logical, you have to be a chacham and then a navon. When you are tapping into something spiritual, when you are going ahead and trying to get guidance from above, there's something that you can build on even before the knowledge, and that is the fear of God. Reshit chokhmah. What is step number 1 of wisdom in Judaism? Fear of God. Fear of God. You could have a person that has all of the knowledge in the world, right? And could study ethics, and could be even a professor of ethics. But the fact is that if there's nothing there that builds him beforehand, that there's a purpose, right? That there is a purpose in existence. If there's nothing that builds him as he is leading into his chokhmah, it's not going to be long-lasting. What Yosef is telling me is the following, that I sense in your dreams that they are communicating here for the welfare of this society. You have to go ahead and uproot the parot, you have to uproot the corruption. And then you could go ahead and indeed succeed in building the society. But it has to come. You're never going to succeed if this is just going to be driven by man-made ethics. It has to be that there's something that is building up character before you reach wisdom. Navon ve'chacham. This is what we are told. So this is just a little bit of like an introduction to understand what he is doing here. At the same time, it's just to turn to page 232. When he plays this game, when he conceals his identity, when he is dealing with the brothers, there's something very fascinating here. In a society that is controlled by government, the first thing you're going to have is a lack of freedom of the press, right? Freedom of the press, by some it's Kodesh Kadashim, by some it's the holiest thing in the world. In other words, it's very, if you follow the news over the past few weeks, all they are talking about is the fact that Saudi Arabia butchered this Khashoggi. Meaning he was a journalist, and he was critical of the prince. But the problem was that he wasn't in Saudi Arabia. It'd be very easy to take care of him in Saudi Arabia, so he's in Turkey. So a consulate in an embassy of a country serves the same purpose as the country itself. So Khashoggi walked in for whatever reason into the Saudi consulate or embassy in Turkey. He never left, or if he did leave, he left in peace. So that's the story. So, major tumult in the world. Major tumult. Why is there a major tumult? Now, if you think about Saudi Arabia and you think about the region, how many people die a day or over the past year? How many people have been killed in the civil war in Yemen, in the civil war in Syria, the Kurds, correct? Like, what are the numbers that we are talking about over the past 7 years, right? Tens of thousands? No, where's the outcry? Is there an outcry to this extent for the one person? No. The answer is that by the media, they view themselves, the media itself views itself as the holiest of holies. And therefore, to kill other people, but to kill a member of the media when we are the ones who are the carriers, that's unacceptable. So therefore, they expect from Trump to go out and throw out all Middle East policies, right? To go ahead and undo all relationships with Saudi Arabia because of this one member of the media. Okay, that's an approach. There's a museum in Washington that's called the Newseum. The Newseum. And I was encouraged by one of my brothers to go, and I'm there. It's a little bit of a nauseum, too. I'll tell you why. It's like a temple for the media. The media holds of itself as really, when they threw out God, they created themselves as the new gods. And for them, their height, in other words, their Kabbalah Satorah, their height of their achievement had to do with the Vietnam War and with the resignation of Nixon. For them, that was the height. Why? We discovered the truth. We are the carriers of the truth. And we discovered the truth. So the way they celebrate, right, of August 1974, that was this moment of what Bernstein and Wood, right? So that was the moment of celebration. It's interesting to know, just that when we were children, we went on a family trip to Washington. I was 4 years old at the time, and my parents took pictures. And they took a picture of myself and my older brother by the White House. And my mother wrote on the back, and the date was August 8th, 1974. And my mother wrote on the back of the picture, and she sent it, to someone, that Uzziel, meaning my late father, convinced Nixon to resign. That was the joke. I remember seeing it as a kid. Right? And I remember feeling a little bit confused. In other words, why wouldn't my father do that? Like, there was a level of confusion when I read. So I was there at them. This is Kabbalah Satar for them. That's the museum that you see there. Now, by us in Judaism, just for the record, we have something called the laws of Lashon Hara. There are things that you must share. Right? There are things that you must share. It is important for people to know that if you have an individual that is not acting in an ethical way, keep away from him. Don't invest with him. Keep your children away from him. There are things that it's the biggest mitzvah to do is to share information. And then there are things that you shouldn't share, right? Things that are not verified, for example. Things that are going to just hurt people and you are going to achieve nothing. And I have a feeling that the New York Times and the Washington Post do not turn to the Chafetz Chaim and the laws of Shmirat HaLashon before they publish things, right? I have a feeling they don't now. So the idea of the free press, which is Kodesh Kadashim in other societies, does not exist at all. So now I want you to imagine the brothers of Yosef making their way into Egypt. Okay, and Midrashim tell us that as they are there seeking out food, there is some more information they are looking for. What were they looking for? What happened to their brother? What had happened to their brother? So they come, and the first person they are interacting with is this ruler who is very harsh on them, very harsh, asking them questions, taking one of them away. He plays this incredible game as he is hiding his identity. And what they would naturally want to do is find out more about who is this fellow, right? Who are we interact? Who is this ruler, this fellow known as Fanat Paneach, right? Who is he? But there's no free media, right? They can't purchase a newspaper. So my feeling is that they could have nevertheless found out, let's go to a barber shop. Right? You go to a barber shop, and as they get a haircut, they could ask a few questions or two. Who was this Yosef? And odds are that they would have realized that there was like a little bit of a gap in his resume, right? In other words, they would say, young child and became suddenly prime minister, or perhaps someone's going to mention to them in passing that he happened to spend some time in jail, or perhaps someone's going to mention that he was once a slave. It would be very, very possible for the brothers to put the pieces together and figure out who he really is. And this would be quite problematic for Yosef, because he's trying to conceal his identity. So the question is, what is the best way to prevent people from asking questions? The best way is to accuse them of being spies. By turning to them, and he said to them, Meraglim atem, you guys are spies. You're here to figure out, you're asking questions, you're either trying to figure out how to conquer the lion, or you're trying to figure out where to get grain. You are spies. Suddenly, they would be afraid to ask anyone. In these societies, they say that in the days of the KGB in Russia, you would walk into shul, right? And the fellow sitting next to you, right, you couldn't ask him anything about how things are doing in Russia, because he could be an undercover agent of the KGB. So they understood very well that as soon as they are accused of being spies, the questions are gone. Yosef could conceal his identity. Why does he want to conceal his identity? So remember, for him, there are two things he's trying to achieve: the dreams and the welfare of society. So this is really the bottom line to deal with our original question. What are we here to do, right? When we light those Hanukkah candles, who do we think about? We think about both. We think about our people. We think about the fact that we can inspire the people of Israel to value their tradition, to value who they are, value what we are accomplishing. And that's what Yosef is doing. He's taking care of his people. Remember, he believed that the dreams will be beneficial for his family. He was thinking internally regarding his family members. But at the same time, he did incredible things for society, right? He had complete control, and there was complete honesty, right? It's interesting that I mentioned earlier that he did not want one person to come for a family, because someone could walk in claiming that he's purchasing it for 100 family members, when really he's going to go ahead and turn around and sell it in the marketplace. This is a person that is concerned about righteousness, concerned about ethics, concerned about getting a society back on track from the fat cows. So yes, Judaism is concerned about Umot HaOlam. We are concerned. We focus on ourselves, and hopefully we could be that light, continue being that light. It's an opportunity to wish everyone a Chanukah Sameach. We should have a meaningful Hanukkah as we grow as Jews, and we continue our commitment to Klal Yisrael and Am Yisrael. We thank you also. We thank the sponsors. Enjoy the Sudaniyot and all the wonderful things. We see you Bezrat Hashem next week. Next week is the last class of the semester. Okay, and everyone gets an A. What was that? A test? There should be, but there isn't. Good. Yishkoach for coming.